All right. Good morning, everyone. It's not morning, I'm sorry. Hello, everyone. This is Romina, and we are the city housing team. And today we're going to present the results of our project. Thank you, Alex. So first of all, the project is focusing on the local housing policies, and the local housing policies are looking for bringing a balance between the private sector and public sector and how they're going to match each other in making housing condition better. The key concerns in this matter is that, first of all, we have some unmet housing demands in some places and locations. The second one is that we want to achieve the intended goals that we introduce for policy. We want to make sure that the policy is moving in the correct direction. And the third one is that we are looking for the effects of current housing stock on our economy. One big problem is that in this key concerns, the first one, the housing demand, is not always answered in the best way because the private sector is not going to automatically answer to it when it's not profitable and the profit is not favorable. If it has some risks that might, somehow put their structure in disaster, then they will not follow it. They will not put their profits in it. So in this situation, the government or non-profit organizations may come in to help. But even these organizations need the data to help them. And this data needs to be in detailed and up to date. So the goal of this project is to fill the gaps in data by using information that come from, for example, on some less seen data resources and put them in a places to help the local housing market activity and housing needs with data source. To do so, the project framework has some steps. The first step is that we collect this data from all these websites that we had a connection with and they were not well known or they were not used usually, and clean this data and make them useful for the next steps. First of all, we want to see what is the geographic levels and then calculate to the smallest geographic level possible to have the best detail of the data. And then we made the indicators useful at this geographic level. Then we categorize them and document the indicators. After that, we wanted to merge them into a unified style of the data set that can be useful to the future steps of other organizations. And then to have the visualizations useful, we put them in a dashboard. The dashboard provides graphs and all tables and some introduction to the matter. And the last part is that it's going to be not only quantitative, but also qualitative. Like you can see the connection between these two kinds of data. From this part that we talked, that these indicators that are not usually seen in organizations and analysis, the most important part is the non-indicator, not ACS indicators. What does it mean is that usually you have ACS or decennial census that you use as your data source. But the point is that these non-ACS indicators can help you to fill those gaps in detail. These ones include housing construction activity, for example, the building permits, the eviction data, index measure of change in housing price, for example, using the data sources from Zillow and FHFA, vacancy rate, whether HUD or USPS, single family home market demand supply indicators, both of them, counts of rental assistance projects and units, and the last one, projects of expiring assisted units, like the ones that are for affordable housing programs. Besides these non-ACS indicators, we also use the RHRA survey data to do some more analysis. This survey was having a lot of open-ended questions that were asking about the housing condition.
Hello, I'm Corey. I'll begin by talking about some of those non-ACS indicators, and I'll be talking about the support programs. First one I'll be talking about is the low-income housing tax credit, otherwise known as LIHTC. What it is a tax credit given to developers to build or renovate buildings with the requirement that a certain percentage of those units are going to belong to low-income or rent-burdened families. Within LIHTC, there's two different brackets. There's a 4% and a 9%. They're basically the same thing, with one exception being that the 9% is a competitive program, whereas the 4% is a non-competitive program. Many of these assistance programs have a certain timeline for how long the units have to stay affordable for. In this case, it's a 15-year compliance program. After the 15 years, the owner can opt out of the program or continue under what is called extended use for the 15 years. And then we just like to note that for our calculations for LIHTC, we're going to include both 4 and 9% into that same value. But going on to the next slide, another source we looked at was the HUD, or Housing and Urban Development, Section 8. One of the parts of Section 8 is the project-based assistance, which is a government program to help the low-income family with rent. We also wanted to use another portion of Section 8, which is the housing choice vouchers. However, we chose against using that data source because for small areas and rural areas, exact numbers are hidden for privacy concerns. And then the final source we looked at, if we go to the next slide, is the USDA Section 515, which is a principal source for financing for rental houses in many rural areas. And the important thing to note about Section 515 is there's been articles released stating that there's vastly more than expected units are leaving the program, which could be an area of concern for many rural communities. And what we wanted to do with some of this information was to show the percentage of units for a specific county whenever those expiration dates were coming, to better inform them of coming problems with their renting assistance. However, as we'll show on the next slide, it wasn't able to be fully fleshed out due to time constraints and some issues with their dates. As you see here, here's a graph of what we are trying to conceptualize. This shows the USDA Section 515 lost per year for Cedar County. But as you see the rightmost column, there's 25% of those units where a year is not given for those projects. That could either be because those projects are still being built, or just in that data set, a year's not given. And if a year's not given, it's hard to tell when it's ending. And also, as you see on the left, there's about 26% of the units where the years given is a year that has already passed. And that could either mean the project is no longer active, or the owner chose to re-opt in and the date hasn't been re-updated, so we don't really know when that project is ending. And a little shift of, instead of looking now at some of the data sources, I'll talk a little bit about how we're gonna show the information. We wanted to be able to show some of these indicators with a simple design. So we chose looking at a speedometer. On the left, you're gonna see one of our initial designs in Excel, but we thought it was a little too clustered and didn't get what we wanted to show. So we redesigned it in RStudio, and as you can see, that's what our final thing is gonna look like at the right. And then you'll finally hear from me talking about our workflow process, because we understand this project we're taking on may be added to or changed to into the future. So we want to document how we are currently taking this raw data and transforming it into what our final data set is, knowing that it could be added to. And we also want to talk about the process to apply what has been done here to another level of geography. For all of our information, we chose the county level of data, but we also want to be able to choose smaller levels of information. And so on the next slide, it'll show a diagram of what we're talking about. If you cannot read this, we do include this image in all of our documentation in GitHub, but I'll walk through it. Basically, we're going to obtain the raw data somehow and save it to a file. Then we're going to be taking an R script that is unique to that raw data and basically aggregate the indicators we want from that raw data to the specific formatting. The formatting we chose is where the first column is a list of all of the FIBS codes we want to include, in our case, county FIBS codes. But if you wanted to look at another level of geography, say places or tracks, if we change that to all the track FIB codes we wanted to look at, that would accomplish it for a different level of geography. Once we do that for all the raw data sources, we have another, we save those reformatted things to a clean file. And once we gather all the clean files, we have an R script that will merge all those clean files into a single file, which is our output data source.
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Tanishk. So for our vacancy indicators, I have used HUD aggregated USPS administrative data. So it is basically a data set called address management system, which is compiled by USPS mail carriers. They have this, they compile this data because it is useful for them to increase postal efficiencies by noting vacancies. So this data is particularly useful as it is updated every 3 months. And so addresses can be vacant for so many reasons, like a property that is for rent or sale can be vacant for a short time. And according to HUD, the current inventory of vacant properties results from two main causes: the foreclosure crisis and as well as long-term urban decline. So here we have created two indicators using this data. So first one is total percent vacant, which is basically the total residential vacancy percentage. So, and the second one is percent vacant 36 months. So it is the percent of total residential addresses that are vacant for more than 36 months. So in the next slide, so here you can see the heat maps for the above two indicators. So if you observe the total vacancy percentage map, you can see the southern counties have relatively high vacancies, and long-term vacancy, long-term vacancy percentage map also shows a similar pattern. So, and you can see Lee County has the highest vacancy rate of 7.83%, and also the third highest long-term vacancy rate. Going next. So now we'll see what no-stat addresses are. So large fluctuations like sudden and sharp increase in the addresses in the number of addresses are observed due to no-stat category. So an address can be no-stat for many reasons, like rural route addresses that are vacant for more than 90 days, or like premium PO box service locations that offer street addressing. So this can be useful to register PO box as a street address in order to receive packages from private carriers like UPS and FedEx who require a street address for delivery. So it is a relatively new program by USPS, which increase total number of addresses and also affects the vacancy percentage. So here you can see the vacancy difference when no-stat addresses are subtracted from the total residential addresses for calculating vacancy. On the right, you can see the table with differences in percentage. So Monona County has the highest difference of 1.764%, which means it has a relatively higher no-stat addresses. So here you can you can see the vacancy scatter plot that I created using the two vacancy indicators. So the total vacancy percentage versus the long-term vacancy percentage. So it is made using LOD calculation, which allows you to compute values at the data source level and the visualization level. So here values are aggregated to the county level from GeoID. So the scatter plot is divided into 4 quadrants: high, 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 low, 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 and low, high. So circles here represent counties, and their size represent the total percent vacant, like total vacancy percentage. And if you hover around the circle, you can you can see the similar info to what it is shown in the bottom left corner for the county. So, and also here you can see the pattern where counties with low vacancy rates are close to each other and those with high vacancy rates are more dispersed. So next, for eviction indicators, we have used Iowa legal aid data. So it is basically a non-profit organization providing critical legal assistance to low-income and vulnerable Iowans. So from this source, we got data on eviction filings from 2017 to 2022. So we have created two indicators. The first one is average eviction filings per 1,000 households, which is basically the average of eviction filings during 3 years from 2019 to 2021, which is standardized per 1,000 households. And the second one is eviction filings 2021-2019. So which is the percent change in eviction filings since 2019. So a high eviction rate indicates stress between renters and landlords and possible need for eviction prevention programs. So the problem with this data is like the data for different counties is missing in like different years. So it is difficult to visualize the average filings or like filing trends over the years with this data. So other data sources we use for eviction is Eviction Lab. The Eviction Lab is associated with Princeton University. So the data is available for all counties across the US and is consistent. So we have used the most recent 5-year data for our indicator, and it is standardized per 1,000 renter households. So next. So here we have the indicators from the Iowa Realtors data, which are inventory of homes for sale and days on market until sale. We can see the Polk County has the highest inventory of sales, which is way ahead than any other county there. So, and Humboldt County has the highest days on market until.
All right, so a little bit of a segue into real estate data. This comes from the Zillow Home Index Value, which is from the popular real estate website Zillow. It's basically a measure of typical home values across a given region. In this case, our region is Iowa, and we included both single family and multifamily homes across Iowa at the county level. And this data is useful for understanding Iowa house price changes. And then we also looked at the HFA house price index, which is a measure of the movement of single family house prices. And it basically looks at repeat sales or refinancings on the same properties. And we included house prices in Iowa at the county level. And then the US Census Bureau Building Permit Survey, it includes all authorized housing building permits across the country. In this case, we used Iowa again at the county level, and it's useful for understanding construction growth trends. So now we're gonna look at the data analysis and management tools that we used, which includes use of word clouds in R, a Tableau dashboard, and some jump analyses. Okay, so this is kind of a little sub-project, but it's a series of keyword analysis methods that exist in R, and we wrote these functions that simplify this process for programs such as the RHRA, where people write in their own answers to questions, so they can basically write whatever they want. And analyzing this type of data can be complicated. So we're using word clouds to find keywords and represent them. So what is a word cloud? It's a bunch of words on the screen, right? And where the size of each word is proportional to its frequency. So the bigger the word, the more it shows up. And then what is a co-location and co-occurrences word cloud? Well, it's a little bit of a modified word cloud where it shows relationships between words that frequently show close to each other in the data. And that's what we call the neighborhood. It'll become clear when I show it. Okay, so here is an example of the function at use. So we have this question, which is, what community amenities are important to you in choosing a location to live? There are 3 towns here from the RHRA survey, right? So we have Harrison, Potawatomi, and Mills. And you can see the word clouds. These are the top, however many words there are, but top keywords from the survey. And you can see patterns here, such as all of them, the number 1 amenity that they want is restaurant. And another one that you can see is also park. And you can see some frequently showing up ones, such as grocery store, trails, park. Well, I just mentioned park, but yeah, it's just library. And interestingly enough, Potawatomi, I'm not sure if you all can see it, but right there at the bottom in pink, there's it's a small word. It says pickle. I don't know what that means, but apparently a pickle is an amenity that Potawatomi wants. So it's kind of interesting. And then, okay, so this is the co-locations and co-occurrences word cloud. A different set of questions. I have 2 of the same question for different towns. So this is Grinnell and this is Atlantic. So here you can see this question, the way it's phrased, it leads to a different kind of answer. So in the previous question, this is more of a, if someone asks you what amenity do you want, your answer is probably gonna be a noun. It won't be a verb, it won't be an adjective. Now here, when you're asking what should be the top priorities for improving housing in Grinnell, people are gonna give out more varied answers, right? So we want to display adjectives, we want to display verbs, and we also want to display nouns. So this is what's happening here. You can see that people have mentioned things such as low income, right? So more low income housing. It takes a little bit of a creative mind to like understand what these words mean in relation to each other, but a lot of them are pretty self-explanatory. So like lower taxes, single family houses, first time home buyer, or first home, the order is all over the place, but that's the idea, right? And now looking at Atlantic, you can see that people, again, there's similar words, right? So like lower property tax and more income housing, which is probably like more low income housing. So you can see relationships in what people are answering.
Okay, so I have created a multiple linear regression model, which is basically using 1 or more explanatory variables to explain or predict the value of the variable we are interested in. So here we are interested in predicting eviction filings. So I have used the explanatory variables I have used. You can see those are like the cost burden renter, typical renter costs, %515 properties, and %LIHTC per household. So in the next slide, yeah, we can see the R square equal to 0.4753. So R square is basically the quotient of determination. So, and we can interpret this as 47.53% of variability in the eviction filings can be explained by the multiple linear regression model with the explanatory variables, with these explanatory variables. So, and also you can see on the right, like in the image, we have the prediction expression. So it can be interpreted as like a unit increase in %515 property is associated with the decrease in eviction filings by 0.67 points, like by keeping all other variables constant.
Great, and now we're going to transition into sharing our Tableau dashboard, and I'm just going to do that quickly. Can we all see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. Great. So what we have here is 3 different resources we collected, being able to show the data we've provided, and I'll walk through you how to use each of these 3 things. To begin with, we'll look at profiling a specific county. What is here is on the left, we give a list of all of the indicators that we have looked at. And first we can select a specific county that we want to look at. We'll look at Adams County. We've grouped these indicators in subgrouping groups to help better just group them together to look at specific things. If we select a specific indicator like owner occupied rate, all this information is going to populate on the right. It's going to explain what that indicator is. So the percentage of households living in owner occupied homes. It's going to give an interpretation of what values for that indicator might mean. It's going to give the median of all the counties in Iowa, as well as the value for that county you've selected. And then this indicator we're looking at is an ACS data. We give the margin of error as well. And then on here, as we talked about, this is the speedometer that will update with whatever indicator you're looking at. And we have this color coordinated into thirds. So this orange circle is going to be your lower third, which is something that you might want to improve. This blue diamond is the middle third, so you're fine. And then this blue square is you're in the upper third, you're probably doing really well at it. This gray X indicates that we cannot obtain data for it, and at least data for this specific county for the specific indicator. So for Adams County, there was no housing price trend for Zillow. And just to show you different things, so if we look at aging housing stock, which is the percent of housing units built before 1940, we can see Adams County has about 46% of their houses are old houses, which is obviously not the best to look at. And if we look at a different county, say Cerro Gordo, we can see that their aging housing stock is only 30.4%, which is in that upper third. However, their owner-occupied rate is in that lower third of only 69.6%. Moving on to our second part, where let's say you just want to look at a single indicator and see how all 99 counties are going to look at it. So we have this, we have a drop-down where you can select the indicator you want to look at. We can look at the average days on market. So this is single family homes, on average how many days they are. It'll populate with that. As you can see, Adams County, we weren't given a value for, but you can highlight over and it'll show you the value for that county, as well as if it's an ACS data, the corresponding margin of error. And I know this was talked about earlier, but I'll show the eviction filing trend and why it's a little unstable. A lot of these counties we cannot get accurate data for, so we just included them as null values. But as you can see, like, I don't know the exact reason why, but Cerro Gordo is very high on this, and then the rest range from negatives to slightly positives. And then finally, our last thing is using a scatter plot that was showed earlier to compare 2 indicators to see if there's any sort of correlation besides those 2 indicators. So what we're looking at now is a 5-year total employment change rate versus the Zillow housing price trend. And as you can see, it's split into those 4 quadrants of low, low, high, low, high, high, and low, high. Along with, we gave a graph, a map of Iowa, and color coordinated it to see if you wanted to look at a specific county like Franklin, you can select it, and it's going to show you on that scatter plot where it is on that map. And just to show a couple of examples, maybe you want to see if there's any correlation between that employment change rate and if there's anything with home ownership rate. And from the looks of that, you can see it doesn't look to have any sort of really big correlation to it. But if we look at something like the typical owner cost and typical renter cost, would make sense that as your owner costs increase, so does your typical renter cost. And the actually more interesting thing about this graph is that if you look at one of these red counties, like Henry County, we see that the typical owner cost is greater than the typical renter cost. But if we look at an orange county like Adams, the typical renter cost is actually greater than the typical owner cost. And then finally, one other one we found interesting to look at was looking at typical owner costs against a recent vacancy rate. And it shows that as the owner cost increases, the vacancy rate seems to decrease.
Okay. These are some of our recommendations for further study that can happen based on the data that we found and analyzed in this project. So first of all, although that we had some basic and medium housing knowledge, but having professional housing and economic knowledge that is affecting the housing condition can be more helpful with data science. And the other thing is that as we were working specifically on RHRA, the data that we have in this project can also be aggregated and unified with RHRA data to help with their further projects. The other thing is that the word cloud analysis that we have in here can be developed, and there are always new codings that are being to the RStudio, they're being added, and they can be used for better analysis in the future. And we looked at indicators individually. They can also be looked like in relation with each other. We had the comparing indicator part, but it can be like developed into more stuff like correlated ones and others. And the last one is that the level of geography that we look can be even smaller and look for more detail. Thank you, everyone. Okay, if there is any questions or comments, we're here.
Hi, I'm one of the folks that works in the RHRA program, and I just had a question about one of the slides. There was I think it was towards the tail end where it had the little X, the little diamond, the little triangle, and the little rectangle to indicate, yes, yeah, the groupings. Did you all find that there was any data that you were not able, that you saw as like, this is an important thing to have data on, but you couldn't find the data for any county at all? Or were there any categories of data where you were only able to find data for a specific part of the state? Like the Zillow, the housing price trend in Zillow, for instance.
Yeah, I think one of them was the housing choice vouchers, that Section 8 thing where they help pay for the rent for low-income families.
Sure.
That data is collected at a tract level, and if there's like under so many people in that, they completely like just won't show the value. So
right, because it can be personally identifying information.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. Since it's at a tract level, basically every county is affected by that. There's at least a couple tracks at every county that has no data. So I think that was one of the indicators where, because every county is affected, we just chose not to use it. But that's one of those that we couldn't at least find accurate data on.
Gotcha.
One other kind of data that was hard to find and is usually privately shared is the homelessness data, that we couldn't really work on it because the resources would not be public. And the other thing that might be helpful is when you're, for example, working on housing stock, the availability of jobs can also be helpful, but it's not something that you can go to a website and collect whole data for a county or for all Iowa, like, okay, this number of jobs are available, because many of them are in private companies and they don't share them.
One thing that might be useful for that first piece of data, you mentioned that you weren't able to find the homelessness counts. There's, if anybody's interested, there's a data collection that happens twice annually across the country called a point in time count. and that tracks twice a year, every sort of section of the country that has some sort of coordinated homelessness response will go out in the middle of the night and count the number of people experiencing homelessness. And so that might be something to consider if you're continuing to update the dashboard. Is you can, and I'm pretty sure point in time PIT for short, and I believe that that's publicly accessible data. Otherwise, yeah, great. Just wanted to say thank you so much. This is really
And I know we
interesting
also
info.
try to reach out to the housing trust funds of Iowa, because there's no public, they all have data, but there's not publicly shared at all, and they each have their own thing. We tried reaching out to a couple of them, but none of them gave a really timely response. So we just, within our time constraint, we had to ditch that idea as well.
Gotcha.
I have a quick question. This is Omar, and I also work with the RHRA program. First, thanks for looking at some of our data. I was really curious what you were going to come up on that section. And my question has to do with the word cloud section that you talked about. And I was particularly interested in the relationships, and one of you mentioned that depending on the question you ask and the way the question is framed or asked, you can tell the type of words you're going to get as responses. So my curiosity is, and maybe you didn't get to this point in your data analysis, but could we use this kind of retroactive way of looking at the data to create better questions in our survey? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think. Oh,
go on, Felix. Yeah.
Yeah, I think as long as the question. So I don't think I displayed it, but one of the questions was, what are specific actions that X town should take, right? So actions is a very clear way of asking, like, okay, so what do you want to do? You want to do more parks, more restaurants, whatever, right? So people can answer in very concise ways. So I think it would be good to have questions where the answer doesn't have to be that wordy. And definitely this could be used retroactively, just to see what kind of answer you get from people and how useful the answers end up being. So you can use it to build back from that.
Hi, this is Sandy Burke. Can I ask you to put the map back up that had the vacancy rates from the Postal Service?
Oh, that would be,
Somewhere you had maps from the Postal Service.
Postal Service.
Yeah, no, right there. Okay, well.
This is vacancy, sorry about that.
Yeah, right, the vacancy rates, yeah. No, go back to the maps. The map, just the maps themselves. You had it there, the two maps side by side. Yeah, that's it. Okay. No, that's not. No, that's homes for sale. Didn't you have one? That,
I'm sorry. Let me. It's not
What's
letting
that
me.
red heat map?
It's a heat map. Is it? No, these are.
You should go back. Yeah.
One more.
More. Yeah.
Keep going.
One more.
That
yes.
one.
Okay, we got it. Nope.
Which one? I didn't see it.
You
Oh,
passed it.
okay. Let me.
Go forward until you get to Tanish's part.
Is it this one?
Yes,
That's
that's it. Stop. Okay.
I'll stop.
Yeah, okay. Some of those vacancy I was surprised, okay. Some of those vacancy percentages are pretty low, lower than I expected, because when we use the ACS data that we've done in the housing DDM, data for decision maker, some of those percentages, particularly for rural counties, come up into double digits. Did you have any thoughts on that? And I'm looking at my screen here because the numbers are small. Lisa, do you have anything on that or thoughts on that, or Bailey, about what we find from the ACS data compared with the Postal Service?
I don't have any intelligent thoughts on why there are differences, but
Okay.
I thought that that was one of the side benefits of what we did, is that we've got a couple of indicators where they're basically measuring the same thing, but they come from different sources.
Mhm.
And that scatter plot tool that we developed, I think will be really useful in letting people see that you might have what you think are two of the same indicators, but you get either really similar results, which you would be glad about, because then you'd have confidence in both sources. Or in this case, we might get something completely different, and that way we question one or both sources.
Yeah.
And I think, just from a programming perspective, that's good to know that, oh my gosh, we've been using these vacancy data and they're really not, they're not looking right.
Yeah, right. Well, the thing is, it struck me is sometimes when I see vacancy rates for rural counties in particular, but other counties, they're somewhat higher. Okay. And you would suggest that there's no, let's say there may not be, quote, the urgent need for some of the rural housing because they are showing higher vacancy rates, but these are much more moderate in terms of vacancy rates, and some of them are a lot lower than I would have expected. So I thought that just surprised me from seeing your Postal Service data relative to what I sort of more normally know of from the ACS data. Sorry.
One thing is that it's always in rental or multifamily, the rule of thumb on vacancy is that anything less than 7% is good. Anything over 7% indicates a problem. I've never had a similar rule of thumb for single family housing vacancy, but what I like about that 36-month time period is that it would adjust for seasonal usages, people who, don't spend winters in Iowa anymore. Those kinds of things. So that's interesting to me, but I'd like to see this rental versus single family. That might be part of it, is something skewing something else.
Mhm. Well, this was
Like
just
that one, there was that bar chart that had the 515 projects that were ending. Was that one project, or was that the number of units that was missing?
That was the aggregated number of units for that entire county. And then
So
the
it could
percentage of
be one
units.
project. It could be one project that had 40 units that went.
No, I think so. Aggregated number of units in total, and then the amount of units. So I can't tell you the amount of projects, but it was the number of units we were looking at.
thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
You guys did a marvelous job.
Yeah.
This is fantastic.
And
you
if
so
I
much.
say something on the vacancy, I believe it was for the year 2021. So there might have some effect with COVID with these numbers as well, but I can't speak to the full extent of that.
Yeah, that would be one reason why the numbers here might look a little different than what Sandy's used to, is that big gobbling up of inventory over the last couple of years, pretty substantial nationally. I'm sure there's markets where that wasn't the case, but substantial gobbling up of inventory last few years, of compression inventory.
So did any of you have any particular knowledge in housing before you started this project?
I knew what a house was the extent of my knowledge, basically.
I was working with Professor Ranjarud on homelessness, episodic intergenerational homelessness. And that was the only part of our project that we had problem with finding data specifically. So, but I was, since I'm studying, I was more familiar with.
I think you guys did an amazing job of generating useful data in a 10-week period. That's like a fire hose of learning about housing, learning how to ask the right questions about housing, and then learning how to put data together to try to answer those questions. So all of that in 10 weeks. Great job.
Thank you.
I'm
Thank you.
hoping it excited some of you about working in housing issues in the future.
I think Romina, right? Your community regional planning.
Yeah, I'm studying community and regional planning.
I expected all of you to be changing majors to community and regional planning this fall.
No, but I do
Yeah, that
think
would-
they all have recognized the applicability of data science well outside of the pure sciences and how
Yeah.
it can relate to communities and planning and all these other things. And so, good job, guys.
Well, we're certainly
Thank you.
Thank
seeing
you.
in just the last few years in planning how big data is affecting the decisions that communities make. It's always been a data-driven profession, but the last 5 years with technological advances and everything, being able to pull so many big data sets together, it's really changed the nature of the planning practice in a lot of communities. So there's probably a place for all of you in community and regional planning somewhere.
Romina, you're already in planning, but remember, you can always get that minor or something like that in data science.
Yeah. Well, at
Or
least guys, you
certificate, I
can,
guess, grad certificate.
yeah. Since you're data science, I guess it's better to start with GIS certificate, and then that gives you a way to get into community and regional planning.
You know, if I could make a suggestion here for the data science students, I would highly recommend the GIS minor or the certificate offered by Community Regional Planning. And for anybody who is in the planning area, I could recommend the data science minor or certificate that could round out all your educations quite well. And I think that those two fields of study are highly complementary to each other.
Exactly.
And thank you, Liesel.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
thank you, Liesel.
Yes,
Thank you.
and everyone needs to know that I had the best team. My students were great.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed working with all of them. They're all incredibly talented.
Thank you.
And thank you to the visitors to our group today. We appreciate the questions. Of course, this is a CED funded project, so you can continue to ask questions at a later date. We'll lose the students, but the knowledge, I think they do a good job leaving it behind, so we can continue with it in the future.
Why do I get the sense that Chris is driving? Are you driving?
I'm riding, I'm not driving.
Okay.
I'm being chauffeured.
Hmm.